Hi, folks. So this is part two of personality disorders, and we were finishing up cluster A by talking about schizotypal personality disorder, which, strangely enough, is now listed in the schizophrenia spectrum and related disorders section. So it has some elements that overlap even with psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. They may have some ideas of reference. They may have odd ways of speaking or dressing. They may have suspiciousness that looks like paranoia at times. They have overlaps, therefore, with paranoid personality disorder, and they may have a discomfort or anxiety around other people, and they may not have very many, if any, friends, and so they also have an overlap with schizoid personality disorder. Confusing, huh? Yeah, well, a lot of people think that the schizotypal personality disorder has a continuum, that is to say, from schizoid to schizotypal to the schizophrenia. I think that's reasonable, and that's really why, given the overlap of symptoms, that it's shared now with the schizophrenia material in the DSM. Okay, so let's move on to cluster B, further down the road here. And this is the antisocial personality disorder, the borderline personality disorder, the histrionic personality disorder, and the narcissistic personality disorder. Quite a few here, yes? So the first one is antisocial. These are folks who are in complete disregard for the standard laws and mores of a society and then the rights of others, really, basically. And they violate the rights of others on a regular basis to get what they want. So what they want is most important, yes? And so they are deceitful, they lie, they con other people for their own pleasure and needs, and they are very impulsive. They don't plan ahead. They often get into fights. They may be aggressive and irritable periodically. Reckless disregard for the safety of other people. So they do wild things. Very irresponsible. They often have a very spotty employment record. They often have a drug and alcohol problem. They often get cited for aggressive acts, and so on. In fact, there's some evidence that people with this disorder have some prefrontal cortex right behind your forehead here, disturbances and abnormalities that may be therefore genetic in nature, maybe. And these include the things that might yield less empathy, less care for those who are in distress, greater impulsivity, aggression, and so on. So there is some evidence from lab work, lab settings for this possibility. Now, there's a difference between sociopathic people and psychopathic people. Sociopathics are thought to be people who learn to be more antisocial, but aren't totally antisocial in that they may have empathy for others. They don't desire deliberately to hurt people. They don't like to hurt people, but they don't mind manipulating to get what they want. They tend to be more of the white-collar criminal, if they are in fact a criminal. And you know that people with antisocial personality disorder are not typically aggressive. They are more likely to be, but they are not typically aggressive. They're more likely to be manipulative. So they fall in the more of them fall into the sociopathic variety. And the other is the psychopathic. These are folks who actually to some degree enjoy hurting other people. They think it's fun to manipulate people and to do them dirty. They think people deserve it. They think people are weak. That emotionality is a weak trait. That empathy is a weak behavior. And caring for others is not worthwhile. Yeah. So if you're connected to an antisocial person, you might want to move far away from them socially, because if you cross paths with them, whether they be sociopaths, but particularly for psychopaths, you're just cannon fodder, basically. Okay, so these are folks who have a prevalence that's very high among those who have this disorder in males. 70% seem to be males. That may be a diagnostic error. Okay. There's also an element of testosterone in this because we know that people tend to age out of this disorder. You don't find very many very old people newly incarcerated in a jail or prison system. Very few inmates are over the age of 65 anyway. But about 40 to 70 some odd percent of people who are incarcerated currently have this disorder. Yeah. All right. So what else can we say? Well, it gets worse with age. I'm sorry, it gets better with age, not worse. That's the wrong way to say it backwards. Yipes, forgive me. And some people think that has a loss of testosterone. Some people think they just wear out. Overall, in their manipulative behavior, they see it just isn't working. They're tired of going to jail or getting beat up. I don't know what the real answer is. We don't actually know. Okay, now let's look at borderline personality disorder. Borderline folks are, if they're moderate to severe, are difficult to engage in a relationship with, as are all of these. But this one in particular, because they have very, very frantic efforts to avoid abandonment. So if they perceive it or it's real, it doesn't matter. They lose it. They have a pseudo dissociative episode. They may get irritable and scream and shout. They may get terribly depressed for a short period of time. So they have a pattern, therefore, of very unstable relationships, and in therapy, if you're a clinician, what you've got to be careful of course, is that they're going to perceive any movement you make to change, say, the timing or day of a session, or that you can't come in that day, as they're going to interpret that as your abandonment of them. And in some cases, they become suicidal and cut themselves. And in fact, in many jails, including the county jail here, which is quite large, the first thing they do with any female inmate is look at their arms to see if there's any razor marks. And if they are, they put them in the psychiatric section and remove any means for hurting themselves. So they have a lot of identity disturbance. They don't feel a sense of wholeness. They don't feel like a real person unless they're connected to someone else who wants to be with them, okay? And they will glom onto that person in very quick order and become often very sexual. And at first, everything appears to be great and fine, because in new relationships, they're often very sexual, and you're very touchy-feely and close. But boy, you better not go out for any beer that's unannounced and be 2 minutes late, because, whoa, they'll go off. So they have ups and downs in their moods, but it's so fast. It's a matter of instantaneous change, and then reactive, and then it subsides over a relatively short period of time usually. So that cycling speed makes it very different than bipolar disorder, which is a much longer cycling effect. Very rarely does the cycling in bipolar go hours. That's just not. It's usually months between episodes of ups or downs. So that's one sure difference between them. So they have chronic feelings of emptiness. If you ask them who they are when they're not in the context of relating to other people closely, they can't give you they can't tell you who they are, what they're about, what they want. So they get very angry on occasion, because anger in this case is stemming from the anxiety of the fear of loss and abandonment. And they will at times have a transient sort of stress-related paranoid ideation. And this looks almost pseudo-psychotic, and that's in fact where the original name came from. That borderline was thought to be between psychotic and neurotic, borderline. That name has stuck, but the meaning is not that. Okay. So it's very common in psychiatric settings to see this disorder. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to, I do want to say that borderline personality disorder also ages well. They tend to age out of this on average. It subsides. They become less impulsive, engage less in dangerous behaviors. Okay. The next one is histrionic personality disorder. This is somebody who is very, very uncomfortable when they're not the center of attention. So they're the life of the party, but when they're not the center of attention, they don't like that. They're very shifting moods, so they look a little like borderline. And they use a lot of seductive, physically seductive and attraction behaviors to get notoriety, to get attention, and so what they do is they tend to exaggerate everything, who they know and what their important parts in life, what they've done, and they embellish, and they're easily influenced and very suggestible. They consider relationships a lot deeper than they are. In fact, these folk, when you scratch the surface, are very shallow individuals, very shallow emotions, very shallow in general. Yeah. We don't know exactly where this comes from, but it has to be somehow rooted in childhood. We just don't have a clear understanding of this one. It may intensify with age. This one doesn't age well because as you lose attractiveness and your abilities to maybe physically attract mates in the same way, with the way you dress and the way you act, I'm not sure about all of that, but it is known to not age well. And this can be an issue, right? Then the next one we want to talk about is narcissistic personality disorder. And this one is something that has been in the news lately. Anyway, this is often used as a term incorrectly. So we can have something called selfish behavior that is incorrectly labeled as narcissistic behavior. Now, narcissistic personality disordered people are very selfish, but there's so much more than that. And so what I want to do is go briefly through these and then go to the third edition of this series of films on personality disorders. So they're very grandiose, and they fantasize about how great and important they are. They consider themselves to be the greatest thing. They generally lack empathy. And they have a number of other qualities typically. One is that they're preoccupied with fantasies of success and power and money and sexual conquest. They of course believe they're very special and unique. I'm the best. I'm the greatest. They require admiration. They won't have people around them that don't admire them. They will require it. So they call out the people who don't regularly tell them how great they are and agree with them all the time. Now, that's not good for people in power. That's really, really, really a bad situation. They have a sense of entitlement, of course, and they don't mind, as do antisocial people, taking advantage of others to get what they want. They're very envious of people who have special talents, but they will immediately insult those people if they don't have those talents as well, or if that person has greater talent than they do. They recognize that. They don't like that because it shows them up. So they'll say things like, "Yeah, that's probably the only thing they can do that's good." You put them down at every opportunity. They're arrogant, they're haughty, and those kinds of things. Okay, so let's go to the last part 2. See you in a second. Bye.